let's now discuss the landscape of MLOps in a bit more detail. And this also gives a glimpse on what to expect for the subsequent weeks in this course. So one of the most important considerations when dealing with machine learning applications in the real world is data management. And in fact, I think this is probably one of the most underrated topics when it comes to machine learning applications. And consequently, when some of you go on to apply for machine learning engineer roles in companies, you're very likely going to get a lot of interest expressed by the potential companies which are hiring you on this topic. So data management is a very vast field. There is lots that have happened in the world of traditional databases, etc., etc. But as it pertains to the world of machine learning, so let's focus on that. What's required for the data to be ready for machine learning to consume, right? And as a result, what about the machine learning is being influenced by the data that's actually being fed to it? What assumptions are being made? What underlying data distributions are computed and tracked, etc. So all of those are critical parameters in this topic of data management. So the concepts that you learn are about data versioning. What does that mean? How do you deal with prepared data sets in the form of features? So here, one of the more interesting class of technologies that's emerged recently is called a feature store. A feature store is basically a store like a database of the features which are extracted from a bunch of data sets in trying to solve for a specific problem. So feature stores are quite interesting for especially large language model applications. So that's something we will discuss about. We'll also discuss briefly about ETL and pipelines, but we're not going to spend too much time on those because those have been discussed in other courses, especially for instance the introduction to big data course that I have taught earlier, and that's available as part of the degree as well. So these concepts get covered as part of data management. The tools that we will start using, some of them would be used in the course, some of them I encourage you to read up online by yourself. So one such tool is called DVC, or it's called Data Version Control. I think that's what it stands for. Pachyderm is also another open source tool for it. Feast is one of the up and coming open source projects which offer a feature store that can be embedded with most machine learning applications. And Ray and Spark are two distinct classes of machine learning frameworks, very popular of their own accord. Some like Ray, for instance, has had a lot of success in the modern era of AI applications, whereas Spark has been historically extremely strong with data management for large scale data processing, irrespective of use cases, whether it's classical ML or whether it's like generative AI use cases. So that's the first topic of data management. The next topic would be model versioning and delivery. So here, the ability to apply DevOps concepts of CI/CD on models, right? On code that's producing models, on the models that are getting produced as a result as artifacts. So how do you store and manage these different versions of models? So here the concepts would be model versioning, validation, testing, because those go hand in hand. You don't just test in vacuum. You test for a specific set of scenarios, and those scenarios are applicable for certain versions of models. How do you automate the delivery of the model such that you're not involving any human in the loop? In fact, one of the biggest problem statements until maybe even a couple of years ago was a data scientist is producing a model. The production access is not available to the data scientist, right? Because he or she does not even understand what's required in making something run in production with all the bells and whistles associated with infrastructure, networking, hardware, memory, etc. Then how do we get the two to talk to each other? So that was a big problem statement, right? In fact, there was this really famous paper that Google had published almost like a decade ago, where they said that if you look at a typical world of a data scientist and the time that they spend across the various activities in the company, the actual act of model development or training is actually a very small box right in the center. There are big boxes of activities where like the size of the box is indicative of the time that the person is spending. Some of these boxes are pertaining to provisioning infrastructure. Some of them pertain to cleaning the data. Some of them pertaining to managing the execution in production. So those are not model development at all, right? So long story short, delivering the model in a way that's automated is a critical facet of how do you get reproducibility, reliability when machine learning becomes part and parcel of an application. So here we will spend some time with Git. Of course, Git becomes actually one of the common tools that underlie most of what we're going to do hands-on. So if you're not familiar with Git, not to worry, we will do a quick primer, but more details you can probably look up online. And we'll also get exposure to a particular tool called as MLflow. That's an open source tool for working through the workflow of machine learning models. And it's open source, so it's free for all. It works for a variety of different types of machine learning frameworks. So we will leverage that quite extensively in this course. Then in the third week, we're going to, that'll be the fourth week, sorry, because this is the first week. In the fourth week, we're going to discuss a bit more and dive deeper into the model development itself. But that's something that's familiar with most of you, because one of the prerequisites for this course is, machine learning in practice. So we're not going to focus too much on the development side, but more focus on the experimentation side, because that's where you're going to get challenges with respect to iterations on models. How do you deal with the outputs from each iteration, etc. So building better reproducible models becomes like the mantra for why model experimentation needs to be, a key consideration. So here the concepts would be ML frameworks, pipelines, tracking experiments, the changes to the hyperparameter that are happening, either with automation or without automation. And then the training aspect itself has to be scalable to larger and larger data sets. So MLflow is a tool that we'll continue to use. ML pipelines, we'll see examples of this in both simple small scale data processing using something like sklearn versus what happens in Ray, what happens in Spark. So we'll see that as well. The week following, we start to look at very critical topic, which is around deploying models and having it be served for both real-time use cases as well as for batch use cases. So here, the real-world use cases for machine learning call for different types of deployment models. Sometimes the models have to be deployed right at the edge. So remember the self-driving car example. The models have to be running inside the car, not in the cloud, not somewhere in the data center or in your computer, right? It should run in the car. So that's what's called as edge deployment model. Other times it's running in the central cloud, which is regulated, which is governed, etc. But more often than not, you will see that most machine learning applications nowadays are what's called as containerized, which means they are packaged into nice, pretty looking containers, which are easy for you to ship and run somewhere, and you can stack more and more containers on top of each other to get better throughput, better performance characteristics, etc. So we'll take a look at how that happens, and we will hopefully containerize some of the example applications that you've built up in the previous weeks as like an assignment. Finally, how do you deal with creating inference hardware? So what I mean by that is like not for you to create GPUs yourself, but take these machine learning models and run them on inference clusters such that they can scale to the extent of need that's required. So here the tools that we will take a look at would be like things like TensorFlow serving, Docker. We'll play extensively with during the course. But there are other tools which are also being obviously used in real world today. Like for instance, Ray itself has a module called as RayServe, which is used for serving and inference time model computations. Then NVIDIA has a open source framework called Triton, which looks to standardize all the inference engine workflows. And Kubernetes, of course, is one of the most popular container services available, also coincidentally from Google. So that's week 4. I mean, that's week 5 or topic 4. Then the next topic was going to be about how do you monitor now that the model has gone live. Hopefully you've tracked the different versions using Git and DVC and MLflow, etc. But now that everything is running live, how do you monitor? And when you monitor, what do you monitor? So here we have separated the two problem statements of monitoring the model for its performance versus monitoring the model for monitoring the execution of the model, right? For things going wrong or the model not proving to be that accurate anymore, etc. So in the first part, we're going to monitor the performance of the model. Here, so we take a look at the inputs to the model. We're going to take a look at what's changed. We're going to be able to troubleshoot the models by looking at logs. So this falls under this class of problems called as observability. Like, can you observe what's happening in large scale, in remote systems without having to manually go examine things yourself by hand? So that's a critical consideration. Then performance, obviously, performance characteristics manifest in different ways. So how do you monitor for that? So here we'll use like tools like MLflow again, and there is also a pretty nice open source tool called Evidently. So we can experiment with that as well as part of this course. That's the performance angle. The other counterpart monitoring that's also required is for security and governance. So here, obviously models have to be secure. So that's from a perspective of access control. Like, you wouldn't want credit models that a bank runs to be accessible to non-bankers or other banks, competing banks, because that would reveal the inner details of how this bank is going to make decisions. That's not the right thing. That's one aspect of security. That's the conventional aspect of security. But specific to ML models, the notion of security is even more nuanced, right? Like, for instance, can I break the functioning of an ML model by introducing data sets which are going to make it work in a completely negative fashion, right? That's data injection to make the ML be more error prone, right? So that's one angle. The other angle which is also possible is, can I feed perfectly normal data, but from a class of data points which are undersampled, right, which are not represented well in the model during the model training exercise. How do I know that? I can experiment and throw random darts and see which one sticks, but in a sense, it's possible to create those kinds of representations which make the model decide on a distribution of data that it's not seen before. Therefore, it might produce results which are still syntactically valid, like it's still producing like loan application reject or accept, but the semantics of it, the meaning of it is completely wrong, or is being misled because of the data that's been provided. So here we're talking about monitoring for fairness, monitoring for bias of the model itself. So here two very common tools which are used are Sharp and Lime. So we will actually take a look at using these in some specific examples as well. So now that you've seen what the landscape you're going to get exposed to in this course, let's look at how all of this comes back together. And this slide looks like a lot of theory, but you'll see that at the end of the course, you can come back to the slide and take a look and see whether you've actually ticked every single element that we discussed now, right? Which is, have I gone through model training? Have I gone through each of these steps, and did I get a sense of what the MLOps consideration for this step is, etc., etc. So you can use this as a ready reckoner, as a simple reference, and as you go through the weeks, you can, refer back to this and ensure that you're on the right track. So if you look at overall ML in practice, of course there is data collection, so that's step 0, so I'm not talking about that. There's feature engineering, right? On top of the data that you collect, there is features that you have to engineer. Once those are engineered, then you start to train the model, and then based on various parameters, like for instance even AutoML is basically automated machine learning training, model training. So you can then select the model. So the font in red indicates that human input is required. Otherwise, everything that you see within a red box can potentially be fully automated, right? So for instance, in model training and selection, the model training exercise can be automated, right? Using, like I said, AutoML with, in fact, AutoML also does some level of automated feature engineering. But the good practice is that the final model that gets selected for production, it's best that a human actually takes the final call on that. Then the third step is, once the selected model is available, then you go about publishing that model, either as an API or embed that within programs or as a pickle file. Naturally, that's completely automatable, right? There is no human input that might be required there, except for maybe saying which environment to publish it to. So that's step number 3. Once it's published, then comes the act of scoring or inferencing, and this is usually something that's done online, not under the purview of MLOps directly, but obviously you want to be able to record the outputs. So while I've not included step 4 in the red box, the outputs of that are recorded. And in certain cases it's recorded for regulatory reasons. In other cases, you might record aggregate statistics of it. So that's up to you. Depends on the use case. But in step 5, all of this recorded outputs I'm monitoring for both bias as well as data drift and assumption drift, etc. And if there are certain threshold conditions which are met, like for instance the assumptions have significantly changed, therefore I need to trigger a retraining. So that could be step number 6. So retraining as necessary. So the call to retrain and therefore to promote a new model as a challenger model is a human input, right? That's required. But let's say that I've decided to retrain, and then I've decided that, okay, this could be a good valid challenger model. Then publishing the challenger model, running experiments with it such that both the challenger and the champion are running at the same time, and then I collect the matrices around the performance of the challenger, whether it's meeting the bar of the champion at the minimum and also exceeding it in certain cases. So those are getting collected as matrices automatically. So that's all automatable using MLOps. And then finally, once the assembly of evidence is done, the human comes and takes a look and the matrices of the challenger and says, yes, this is ready to get promoted. And then it gets promoted as the new champion model, and the old champion model gets deprecated as the previous version. Note that I'm not deleting it. I'm still maintaining a version and keeping it offline, but the new champion becomes the latest version. So that promotion becomes a human input, and then once it's promoted, we cycle back again, right? We collect the data from the model being run for inference, monitor for bias, etc., etc. So step number 5 begins all over again. So this is the ML life cycle with MLOps, being highlighted as, key contributors in which step, and in some steps it's actually completely automating the work for you. So that's another reason why I think you should learn it, because you don't have to, waste your hours in doing those steps yourself manually. Thank you. So with this, we've concluded the theoretical portion of week 1. So now we will move into the hands-on portion in the next video.